One of the most egregious was one federal employee that was working remotely that had started his own business, full-time business, and during the work hours, his mother was responding to his emails.
Well, on to a very different topic from space. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. Senator Ernst in particular, you are now the chair of the DOGE Caucus in the Senate, which is super exciting. And so I was hoping to focus today's conversation on just government efficiency, but in particular to start off on just like financial flows. How does the Fed send out payments? How are those tracked? What are those done? I know one of the first bills that you put out with the caucus was codifying some of the work that the early, sort of DOGE team, sort of put together. I'd love to hear about your sort of work with the DOGE team, that early bill, and we can take it from there.
Well, thank you, Delian, and it is great to be here with you, and thanks to Hill and Valley Forum for doing this panel. I think we'll have a lot of fun with it. To answer your question on how are those payments made coming out of Treasury, that's a really good question. Nobody really knows. So what has happened in previous administrations and for many, many years, so we can't put one particular president on a pedestal here, but the way the payments are made through Treasury, and approximately 95% of federal payments go through Treasury, is they're just submitted. There has been no tracking requirements, no auditory numbers that are attached to any of those payments, no explanations attached to those payments. So if you are double paying, it's not caught, it's not really auditable. So we are changing that. One of the proposals that we have coming out of DOGE in response to that is then to require those numbers that go to specific accounts for any of the federal payments, to require that they are putting a description of the payment in there. And Elon has been really great about this. He's like, I don't care, just type something in. It can be a couple of words, just type something in so we know how to track it. It's so simple, and yet we haven't been pushing for that in previous years. But we've got a lot going on in DOGE, and I'm really excited to talk about it today, so thank you.
No, of course, thank you for joining us. Keith, you originally, started your whole tech career, sort of at PayPal, which was one of the early internet payment flow, sort of companies. I guess when you hear about, sort of Senator Ernst talk about some of the challenges internally at the government, how do you think the government should be thinking about adopting some of these, sort of financial services, technology companies and their, sort of workflows?
Well, interestingly enough, 25 years ago, when Elon was CEO, we were losing way too much money in fraud, and the company was almost bankrupt because we weren't actually doing some of these things. Mm-hmm. So I'm glad that Elon learned from that experience and is applying it to the Treasury at like 1,000x scale. So, these are fundamental things. None of the companies we're involved in, including Ramp, would ever survive an audit if we did anything even approximating what the Treasury has been getting away with for 20 years. Mm-hmm. So it's insane that we don't have basic accounting principles being applied to the federal government.
Yeah, and it seems like it's not only true for sort of Treasury and Fed, but also DOD hasn't passed sort of now a government audit for almost 20 years as well. Joni, I know you also had a request out to the Government Accountability Office. A part of the current government's plan for spend is using the GSA smart card system. And DOGE found that there were 3+ cards per employee. Nobody could figure out the maxes or mins, what the payment policies were, who the approver was. And so talk me through a bit about what you guys found there and why your request was out.
Absolutely. Okay. So a lot of folks that work for the federal government will have a GSA credit card. That's to cover official costs for official business. And this is something, Eric and I were just talking about this backstage in the green room. There are approximately 4.6 million GSA cards and accounts. We have half that number when you look at the number of federal employees. So what the heck? I know that I only have one card. That could mean that somebody out there has 3 cards, maybe more, who knows? But the fact of the matter is we're not tracking those cards, we're not tracking those accounts. And again, they can't be audited. So just last year, and I'm gonna provide the stats I was talking about backstage, Just last year at DOD, okay, our troops, civilians, they all have GSA credit cards, and it's for official travel expenses, et cetera. Well, what we found is that there are about 8,000 charges just last year alone that were made at what they would consider risky charge points of sale, where things like casinos. Okay, I don't know of much official business that's being done at a casino. And an additional 3,000 charges were done on federal holidays or days like St. Patrick's Day, New Year's Eve, UFC 300. I think a lot of that, you know, $80 on ESPN Plus, and you get UFC 300. So again, a lot of charges that we need to investigate and uncover the fraud associated with it. But then we also need to find ways of tackling these challenges, deactivating those accounts, getting rid of those extra cards. And it could be that somebody on this stage maybe has a solution to that.
Well, speaking of that solution, Eric, you're the CEO of Ramp. You've become this sort of preeminent AI-enabled corporate card financial, sort of management platform. I want to get your take on, like, okay, you guys have, companies that are customers of yours that have lots of employees. What types of technologies do you guys do to make sure that people aren't spending on MGM Casino and UFC sort of fights, and are instead using the cards appropriately?
Well, it's first, thanks so much for having me here. And look, I think there's just been a tectonic shift in terms of how payments are done by the private sector over the past 10 years. I would almost compare this to, if, it would be ludicrous if the Air Force was flying around propeller planes when there are jets out there. In the past, what makes these cards and charges so difficult to audit is you have your expense policy is a long policy document that exists department by department, but it doesn't drive how the credit cards actually behave, what you can and cannot purchase. We rely on people to show good judgment to not go to the casino for government purchases, to actually use the card for the intended purchase. Then you have other systems for receipts, other systems for accounting and auditing. And so when you start to look back, it's no wonder that you have outcomes like the DoD hasn't passed 7 audits in a row. Part of what's really changed over the past decade is now credit cards are programmable. You can, card by card, have the policy drive what particular merchants are allowed or are not allowed. So you can do things safely, like issue for a critical medical supplier a $10 million card that can be used just for authorized medical purchases, but if it's used at a different vendor, it's denied. You can also do things like say, if we have a purchase order for this amount, if this vendor, even a great vendor, tries to charge the government, even $1 more than what was agreed upon, we can have that negotiation. And so the difference is these aren't just different rules that don't connect. It actually is driving the credit card payments. And when you put this together, you see outcomes like for great companies on stage earlier, like Anduril, to 40,000 organizations, from for-profit to nonprofit, like the Boys and Girls Clubs of America, that are able to cut their costs every year by 5 to 15%, which is dramatic on the scale of, the government, which moves more than $40 billion a year per card. You're looking at billions of dollars a year in savings just if we can replicate the outcome from adopting better technology that private companies have.
So you're saying that if a young soldier takes that credit card to the Pink Pony Club,
oh, sure,
they won't be able to that'll be denied.
That
right?
is programmable,
Okay,
that's right.
Great, thank you.
This, sort of whole day of panels, has been touching on some topics where the idea of, sort of the government collaborating with commercial technologies has been talked about for over a decade in all things aerospace, in defense, what Palantir, Anduril, SpaceX are all working on. But it feels like it's sort of a new topic for the government to be thinking about more basic technologies and in the way they should be looking to commercial industry. And so I guess I'd love to hear from you. How do you think that policymakers and legislators like yourself could be encouraging various departments and agencies to not just look to commercial technology for aerospace and defense technologies, but also for financial flows, auditing, efficiency? How do you think about implementing that?
Now, I think that's really important because I've had the great opportunity to focus a lot on DOD. I love that, and I'm glad that we're wrapping this technology into DOD and our combatant commands. But if you take that same technology and use it for everyday services, that affect Americans, all across the country, around the world, we can really make a difference. And just for example, taking the technology and enabling Treasury to cross-reference with Social Security and a death database to make sure that we aren't paying dead people Social Security. So we're working on those changes in Congress. We need to enable this, simple fixes to use technology and AI for good purposes. So we all think of DOGE as slashing the waste in federal government, but we can also use it, and we forget, Department of Government efficiency. AI can make us so much more efficient across every space and every agency within our federal government.
I mean, Keith, you're on the board of 17 different companies or something like that, known as a world-class sort of COO. How have you seen, just like with all these net new technologies, AI, payment flows, even companies of yours that are customers of Ramp, adopting some of these technologies to be more efficient?
Well, at Ramp specifically, we've seen an increase in productivity by 46% already, and the slope is pretty steep, so it's going to increase. So imagine taking any set of employees and making them 46% better, faster, and increasing every 70 days or so. So like the government needs to get on that train. Obviously, we have limited resources that we should send to the government. We're spending a lot in debt, going to fix that. But also, the American people deserve to keep their money. And so if you don't use technology, we're artificially taxing people, taking money from families that better belongs with them than in this city. And if we don't use technology, we're just going to continue to take more money than we need to from American families so that they can't, raise their kids. And so all this stuff is solved in the commercial world, as Eric pointed out. 5 to 15% on average, we save a company money just by enforcing policies and programmatically. So imagine take the government and take 5 to 15% of all credit card expenditures and just eliminate that. It's probably going to be higher in the government because the abuses sound more stark.
Right.
And I feel like the government can learn from contractors that are closely working with the government that are adopting these technologies. Eric, one of your customers is Anduril, where the CEO spoke earlier here on stage. Can you talk a bit about how Anduril has adopted Ramp, what they've learned, what waste they've been able to identify by adopting Ramp?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, look, I think for any privately run company, and also nonprofits, folks who aren't just taking in tax dollars every year, you need to think about the value of every dollar. And I think one of the first motivations that is driving a company like Anduril to adopt something like Ramp is first, a dollar saved is not a dollar earned. The average American company has an 8.5% profit margin. A dollar saved is equivalent to 12 more earned. Saving money is very, very important. It actually leads to long-term compounding advantages. And so a lot of private companies just structurally are thinking about how can we find technologies that will drive this outcome. The second, I would say for private companies like Anduril is, look, it's very clear when you're employing people and you pay a salary, time is quite literally money. And when you're hiring really extraordinary people, it's very clear, mine is a terrible thing to waste. You never want to take, a top salesperson, a great engineer, and go and have them go spend the last hour of their month, the last two, doing expenses, doing admin work, doing low-value work that, frankly, we can debate how far can AI go. It can definitely do your expenses. It can definitely do your books for you. And I think when you start to go and extend out and think about the context of what government can learn, saving money actually equates to more purchasing power. It means that the dollars that you've raised and are deploying, are not just going, a dollar forward. They're counting for $1.10. They're counting for $1.20. And so when you do this, it actually gets leverage, and it means that the initiatives that you care about, you can put more towards that and less towards funding waste. I think when you have extraordinary servicemen and women serving our country, why are they wasting time on low-value work? We should empower them, to do the role that they're committing to. For folks in the VA who are working to serve our veterans, we want those dollars to ultimately go towards people. And so ultimately making sure we can get the best out of our specialists in the government, the best out of their time, the best out of those dollars. I think that's not just useful in the private industry, but I think it's very important and profound, and a big part of making this country work in a bigger way.
I think there's 2 points. One's a moral point, that it's unacceptable and unethical to really take an incremental dollar from an American family that is unnecessary. The second point, which is a macroeconomic point, is for every 1% of the federal government we can shave, the Federal Reserve can lower interest rates by 1% without triggering inflation. So we can grow out of this debt problem and we can build, this glorious American age. Right now, the Federal Reserve is terrified of lowering interest rates because they think it's going to trigger inflation. That's actually not true, but it's definitely not true if you cut 1 or 2% through Eric and through DOGE.
Speaking of, sort of a waste of time and money, Senator Ernst, you have a, sort of bill talking about the fact that Title V federal union employees are allowed to spend taxpayer dollars on time where they're only focused on the union, and you're looking to take a look at that. Tell us a little more.
Yes, absolutely. I do think when federal workers are at work, and I do want to make clear, just as Eric did, we have really good federal workers out there. Yeah. We do, and they are very focused on their jobs. Most of them are. There are a few bad apples here and there, and those are the ones that I tend to identify, unfortunately, through my work. But through the course of the past 10 years in studying government efficiency and fraud, waste, and abuse, we have uncovered the issue of taxpayer-funded union time. It's where we see federal employees, and they can legally do this right now, work during their regular work day and do that as taxpayer-funded dollars going to their paycheck, but they're not actually working on their duties as a federal employee. What they're doing is working for their union, maybe to increase their wages or increase their benefits on the taxpayer's dime. So we did not see any reporting of that taxpayer-funded union time during the Biden administration. They would not release those reports. So the latest report we have is from 2019. And during that period of time, the federal government committed $160 million to paying the salaries of those that were doing union duties on the taxpayer's expense. So what we're trying to do is eliminate that. If you are going to work on union time, which is fine, if you belong to a union, good on you, but let's not do it when you are supposed to be working for the Veterans Administration, when you are supposed to be responsive to our veterans, when you are working at DOD and should be working on a specific project for the American people. Do your union time another time and be paid by the union, not by your taxpayers. So we'll continue to work on that. Some of the examples I have, and I just want to share them because they're pretty egregious, but federal employees who were caught taking, one taking a bubble bath when he was on a Zoom call with other employees. He got ratted out, of course. Those that are on the golf course, we get those all the time. We had one that worked for HUD that was actually in prison at the time she was supposed to be working for the American people. Somehow her supervisor did not know she was in jail. And the reason she was in jail, she was caught in the middle of the day driving drunk. So obviously not working for the American people. And one of the most egregious was one federal employee that was working remotely that had started his own business, full-time business, and during the work hours, his mother was responding to his emails. So this is just one of many examples of what we find when workers are working remote and they're claiming to do it either on the taxpayer's dime or as union paid time.
I mean, Eric, you guys had the challenge of starting the company in the midst of COVID. You were briefly in person, remote, and now have gone back to an in-person culture. Talk about how it's been a lot better being back in person versus trying to do work over Zoom.
Oh my God, I mean, look, when you want to create something, when you want to collaborate and ultimately work together, it takes, look, I think there's many people out there with extraordinary and great skills, but if people are compartmentalized, looking through a screen one by one, you can do work that's just very straight, very simple and in front of you. But if you want to innovate, if you want to do collaborative work, if you want to look from a design perspective, engineering perspective, sales, and bring those learnings together, there is no other way to solve difficult problems like this than ultimately, this collaborative type of work. And I think when you come back together, I think it's when you get the best out of people. I think it's when you get the best out of people, not just generally in specialists, but also of young people. I think at Ramp we employ over 1,000 people, many of which are extraordinary graduates of universities. And I think when you're 22 and you're just getting started, you learn the craft ultimately of what it takes not just to work hard, but to understand the complexity of what it takes to build great products by seeing and observing other people in person. And I think we deny that to many people when you say, we're going to bring, we're not going to have our lead designer come in today. We're not going to have our lead engineer come in. You can see their work, but not how. And so letting people into the factory, I think, is a part of teaching people how to do well-crafted work. I think it's very important, especially for innovators. But I also think it's important in remembering, this, company's country, it's not standing still. We need to be training the next generation, and not getting people back, I think, is denying a lot of people a great opportunity to learn.
And speaking of the next generation, I feel like a part of what DOGE has done really well is if you look at some of the people that they're, sort of attracting to federal work and serving the country, are these incredibly bright, incredibly young, but very, very talented, software engineers coming into the government in a way that you just haven't seen in a very long time. The brightest fresh grads for the longest time just wanted to go work off in Silicon Valley in tech companies. How do we ensure that the federal government continues to attract that type of talent in? They serve their time and they may rotate out, but we really want them to serve the federal government.
Yeah, I am so grateful because we have seen this movement with DOGE, again, focusing on government efficiency. And that's where we are bringing a lot of these really talented young entrepreneurs into the federal government to share what they have worked with in private industry. Bringing that to the federal government is just really, really important. But we have to make sure that we are really tapping into their talent and abilities, not just talking about it and going through a continual exercise on what can we do to make things better, but actually taking that talent and putting it to work and making things better. In the federal government, we tend to talk a lot about a lot of different things and never really get anywhere. So let's produce a product and allow them to see the results of their work in federal government. But then also the pay and benefits have to be at par with what they would make on the outside as well. I think that's where I know they want to serve. They want to serve in the federal government, and that is great. But we need to reward them for that talent and that ability as well.
Yeah, Keith, you've made a whole career on sort of betting on sort of proven young talent and grooming them from within. How does DOGE groom talent the same way that you've groomed talent over the course of your entire career?
So I think this is the most important point. The critical ingredient to building successful Silicon Valley-oriented companies has been marshaling a critical density of talent. Sort of the team you build is the company you build. And one of the best things about DOGE is it's attracting, it's become a magnet for talent. Elon, spending his time, who's the quintessential successful entrepreneur of our generation, sets an example so that talented people want to channel their energies into products that can move, the needle for the American people. And so just that alone, the statement of DOGE attracting talent and Elon's efforts does make it more exciting for talented people to change their career trajectory and invest in building a better America.
And Senator Ernst, a part of the two bills that you're introducing are meant to introduce, sort of statute to the concepts that DOGE has started to sort of propose and make sure that, look, we're in a current administration, a current environment. There will be a new president, sort of in 4 years. There may be, sort of a new, majority in the, sort of Senate and Congress in 2 years. How do we ensure that, these, pieces of progress that we're making today don't just disappear 2 years, 4 years, 6 years from today, but become true permanent parts of our federal institutions?
It is about codifying what we're working on right now. And in the DOGE Caucus in the Senate, we have 34 members that actively work on legislation and letters and other action items within our realm, pushing the federal government. But we also have all of those members are Republicans. So we do have some Democrats that operate around the fringes. They are absolutely enthralled with what we are doing. They just don't want their names associated with DOGE right now. But we do have willing partners that will help us move legislation. We're doing a lot of that through our various committees, whether it is the Small Business Committee that I chair, whether it is through the Armed Services Committee, we do get bipartisan action on those bills. In the House, we have great partners there as well. They actually do have Democrats in their caucus in the House. And so if we can get the legislation done through the House, through the Senate, we know that President Trump will be more than happy to sign those bills into law. So we are working that. I am so thankful that we have bipartisan support.
Well, Senator Eric, Keith, thank you so much for joining me on today, and hopefully we can keep the government running efficiently as possible.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks,
Thank you so
Delian.
much.
Thanks
Thank you.
so
That was
much.
great.
Yeah.